You know, when I met Amber and then I met Nia, I knew that I had a very big challenge tonight in terms of hard acts to follow. But what a joy. You know, when you think about Nia and when you think about Amber, what is clear are the stakes that are facing this country right now. The workforce we need to build, our economic competitiveness as a nation, our global security, and the identity that we've had as a nation, being a nation of equity and opportunity. So I want to focus tonight on one number and use that number to tell a story. And that number is our country's PISA score. PISA is a standardized test that children take who are 15 years old across the world. And when you look at PISA scores, it can give you a snapshot of where we stack up against other nations. If you look at US schools, where the percentage of students living in poverty is under 25%, we're number 1 in the world in reading and number 2 in math. I don't think that's what comes across when you read about this in the newspapers. But when the poverty rate in schools moves past 75%, we fall to the bottom of the pack after Turkey. So what's really going on here? As many of you know, my background is as a physician. It's about science. And in particular, it's about the impact of stress on children's developing brains. And it's that way of looking at kids that has really driven Turnaround's approach to working in schools and working with kids growing up in poverty. I wonder if all of you know that we are the only mammal on the planet whose thinking and feeling and learning brain develops after we're born. That development and environment and relationship shape the brain. So when those environments are good, everything works, and a brain develops that's disciplined and productive and caring. But when those environments are filled with stress, something else happens. Chemicals are released, chemicals like cortisol. And when cortisol floods children's brains, they freeze. They get that fight or flight feeling. And what happens then, it's like a feeling of relentless fear. They can't think, they can't focus, and they have trouble learning. And often they get triggered by just about everything. So when you have classrooms with lots of kids under this kind of stress, a classroom shuts down. A school can shut down. So it may seem strange, but the connection between poverty and performance lies here. That when we speak about poverty and we think of all the things about poverty that we need to fix, it's not really the story. That when we talk about poverty, what we're really talking about stress and stress's impact on schools and on kids. So what does this look like in schools? Kids come to school, lots of them, unready for learning. There's a 2 to 4 year skills gap, a negative culture, and a completely unprepared staff. That picture is poverty's perfect storm. So at Turnaround, when we think of schools like that, unready, negative culture, big skills gap, we call them red schools. So how many red schools are there? We were interested in this at Turnaround, so we created an algorithm to measure risk in schools, and we looked at New York City. Today in New York City, 65% of the schools are red. 65%. And those schools haven't moved academically in over 10 years. And they have proficiency rates that are plummeting into the single digits with the higher learning demands of the Common Core. So Turnaround's mission has always been about understanding the challenges of red schools and addressing them. What I believe is so powerful in the science is that knowing what stress does to children's brains, knowing that brains are malleable into adulthood, and knowing that kids are going to develop for good or bad based on the environments we put them in. All of this suggests that the catalyst that could actually crack the code on failure in red schools is the deliberate design of a teaching and learning environment grounded in the science. An environment designed to combat stress, promote children's social, emotional, and academic readiness. An environment fortified for teaching and learning. An environment powerful enough to correct for the impact of poverty, not fix it, not ignore it, correct for it. Turnaround has partnered with over 80 red schools. And we partner with schools to build environments like these. And we do it in 3 ways. We get supports to kids that are very, very high risk. We train teachers in skills and practices for red schools. And we work with leaders who are often doing a dozen, 100 different things to coordinate all of those things and ensure that the result is a fortified environment for teaching and learning. I'd like to tell you a story about a real school. This is a school that Turnaround has partnered with over the last 4 years, a school called Wheatley. And Wheatley is a pre-K to 8 school in one of the toughest neighborhoods of DC, a neighborhood called Trinidad. Wheatley was a red school. It was a school where only 14% of kids were reading or doing math at grade level. It was a school in total chaos. Scott Cartland was one of DC's most successful principals until he got to Wheatley. But when he got there, he was allowed to reconstitute the school. That means he could replace 80% of the teachers. And he got social workers. And he actually threw everything at the problems that he saw in an effort to calm the school down. But he and his teachers and his staff were drowning. They couldn't hold an assembly. The kids were fighting. The teachers were screaming. Stress was through the roof, and performance didn't budge. He knew he needed help. But one of the most interesting things that Scott figured out is that everything that had made his prior school successful wasn't enough to move Wheatley out of red. So we partnered with Scott 4 years ago, and we immediately did 3 things. To reduce stress, we got services to the 15% of kids that were tearing up the school. These were the negatively charismatic kids that all the other kids were following. So they were like the leaders. And then we brought practices to teachers to promote readiness for learning. But here are the practices: the skills to create classrooms, like the classrooms you saw in the video. Skills to promote the kinds of traits that all successful students have: motivation, persistence, self-regulation. And we worked with Scott, who was actually doing many, many great things, to integrate all of these things so that he would have what he has today, which is a fortified environment for teaching and learning. What's going on at Scott's school, like all of turnaround schools, dramatic reductions in suspensions and incidents and absenteeism. But most of all, he's on fire academically right now. His numbers are rising. His teachers aren't dumbing down their classes, they're using challenging material. And his kids are able to work in teams and problem solve and do the kinds of independent work that we know are the skills and the capacities that kids need for their futures. But also, one of the things that is so important about Scott's school today is that he's able to deeply use technology to personalize instruction, something he couldn't do when his school was in chaos. And the families at Wheatley are with him now. They're a community solidly behind their children's education. So when you think about what Scott did, he didn't fix poverty. He's correcting for the impact of poverty, and what he has right now is a flourishing school, flourishing for the adults as well as the kids. So, brain science, PISA scores. It's one story. Stress is crippling to kids, but brains are malleable. The science here isn't negotiable, and neither are the stakes for our country. If we correct for the impact of poverty, we are going to have many, many more successful schools. You are here tonight because you know that we have to get this right, that our collective future, our country's future, is at stake. So I am beyond thankful that you're here tonight supporting Turnaround, supporting our kids and our schools, and most of all, supporting a real future for all of America's children. Thank you so much.